changes are fixed. Any other policies that need to be that will be affected by these changes, we will update as time allows. That is from the board report. Next will be the greatest school liaison officer on the planet.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I might, would you, since it is an issue of ongoing interest and there seems to be some change that you reflected in your comment, would you go over again the comments to the board section? What's required for public input?
Yeah, so basically it's the same thing we have been doing.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to provide public input, they need to go online and fill out the public input form. And that needs to be to Sharon, the board clerk, by noon, no later than noon, the day of the board meeting. Whether they want to provide input in person, which they are welcome to, or on the Zoom meeting.
So that there will be no more, it will not fulfill the requirements for them to sign up if they come to the school district office. Is that correct?
That's a good question. Correction. So if they do attend in person and want to provide public input, they can still sign in.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also for in person, as long as somebody is in this room, we're good.
As far as the move.
For meetings.
Right. So basically, then that'll affect the Zoom meetings we're doing every 2 weeks opposite of our traditional board meetings. So we would need to have at least one board member would need to be in person in the boardroom as we do those, but we can still do them Zoom with that change. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. So what change has been made concerning the in-person character of our meetings? How is the rule different now in our understanding than it was, let's say, for this last month?
Is it in person?
For either. But there can, first of all, let me ask the question this way. There can be, it's legitimate for the board to hold both in either in-person or Zoom meetings.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, one person has to be here from the board.
And that's the change we just spoke
Oh,
about.
okay.
If it is a Zoom meeting, at least one person would have to be.
We have
here
to have
present in
an
the
individual
board.
representative in this boardroom in
So
order to
basically
make
what
it
happened
legitimate.
was the emergency order that Governor Little signed that allowed you to do everybody on Zoom without being here physically.
Yes.
Somebody has expired. So it's reverting back to the old rule, the previous iteration of the rules that one person had to be in this room.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ralph, appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? Okay. Do I have to say it again, Chief Nix? Here we go. The update now from the greatest school liaison officer on the planet, Chief Nix.
Oh, I shall pay you for that introduction later, Mr. Chairman.
Why?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent Gilbert, just a couple things tonight. I want to thank all the schools in the district who, along with our Child Development Center, made a lot of cards for our veterans at the Idaho State Veterans Home for Veterans Day. We also collected a lot of snacks, drinks, blankets, donations of money to keep their snack cart funded for the next couple months. While we missed having the great flag ceremonies and assemblies in the schools, Mountain Home High School did an awesome job making a video to honor our veterans that I hope you were all able to see. And both the Tigers and Bennett Mountain High School had great staff and student t-shirts honoring our veterans on Veterans Day. I think this is a great opportunity for the base and the community to think outside the box and still try and do some of the programs in our challenging world. Now I have the school students creating holiday cards for our deployed airmen, while Hacker Middle School is decorating bags for our cookies for our airmen who are remaining in the dormitories for the holidays. I just want to say thank you from the base for your continued support of our programs as well. We're looking forward to see what the second semester brings. While everyone in the community continues to push, advocate, and work hard to improve on our current situation for our students. I've been visiting a lot of schools and I really appreciate how hard the teachers and staffs are working to provide the best education experience possible in this crisis situation. I'm thankful for parents who have been understanding and teaming with teachers, exercising patience as they become educators in their own homes as well to keep their students on track and completing their work. As we approach the Thanksgiving holiday, I think it's a time when I don't think any of us are really getting what we want, but nonetheless, we need to be grateful for what we do have and the team we are the teamwork that we're displaying in the city and on the base and all together as a community. And that's all I have really for tonight, unless any of you have any questions for me.
Good stuff. No, Chief Nix, I don't think we have any questions. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Okay, Superintendent's report, COVID-19 update. Mr. Gilbert?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll start with what I've been starting with, just a current update on COVID numbers in the district. Currently today, as of 4 o'clock, we have 13 active cases between our staff and students, between 4 different schools. So that's up 1 from last week, but it's down from two additional schools. We've got a couple of those active cases that come off the books here in the next day or 2 as well. So we're maintaining our numbers. Those numbers are very similar to what we've seen for most of October and quite honestly, most of September as well. The big issue is obviously the infection rate within the county that still has us in the red with our health agency. Those numbers are slightly better this week than they were last week. However, they're still firmly in the red. One thing that's going to happen is we have worked collectively on a letter that's gone out to media. And this is a letter between the 5A and 4A schools in the Treasure Valley. What would be the Southern Idaho Conference. We're still an academic member of that conference. And so collectively, we have put out a media release. It has already gone out to the Idaho Statesman. That was written in conjunction with Central District Health. And it's really a plea to our communities to do everything they can to help us keep schools open. We continue to see the vast majority of our infections occur at home with transmission from parents to kids. And so we need to continue with that diligence of doing the things in our community to help keep our schools open. You may have saw that the Boise School District is moving their operations to completely online after Thanksgiving. That decision they made was based strictly on operations. It had nothing to do with safety. What they're experiencing is a shortage of bus drivers and a shortage of staff. Thankfully for us, so far, we have been able to overcome some of that. But it does create challenges, and that's really where our staff has helped step up to fill those roles. When we have quarantined instructors in those rooms and quarantine support staff. And so I'm optimistic that we can continue in this hybrid model with what we've seen. Again, I reiterate the social distancing and the masking has helped us maintain those numbers. I will remain optimistic that things will improve over the next 6 weeks. That may just be optimism, but we will continue to monitor that situation, and those things can change fairly quickly from week to week. But so far, we're in a good position. A lot of the districts are having that same discussion. I was on a Region 4 conference call today, and that was the feeling from all the schools to the east of us, is that they're going to try to maintain the hybrid model for as long as they can. Really what we need is our community to help over Thanksgiving. What we know about the virus is that large gatherings tend to lead to large infections. And so I just encourage our community to be mindful of that over Thanksgiving break. It will take us collectively doing those things to help keep schools open, and that is our goal. So that's what I have for the COVID update for this week. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, Mr. Chairman, James, first of all, thanks for all of your effort. This is a phenomenal outpouring of time, energy, concern. I would support 100% the superintendent's appeal to the community to help us here. If they do not, and if the infection grows in its intensity, I'm concerned that we will go into the situation we see in the Boise area, where you just have too many staff out, difficulty attracting substitutes. And this is not a problem of infection within schools spreading. This becomes a professional responsibility problem. And I would hate to see us come to the point where we need to start adjusting based on the numbers of staff that are present and able to serve. How many staff do we have on quarantine again, Jim?
You know, currently right now, I didn't run those numbers today. I can tabulate that when we move on to a different section, and I'll update you on that.
Sure. So I would just throw in my appeal and invite any comments that you might have, James.
Yeah, I think that, you know, again, this goes back to the diligence of the staff. They've done a great job of keeping those parameters in place so they don't put themselves into situations where they have to quarantine. You know, and sometimes that is a very difficult task. You know, when you look at, especially in those elementary classrooms where you're trying to help those kids in those one-on-one situations, it's not always realistic to think that you can keep that 6 foot of distance. But what we've seen is you know, really great compliance to wearing masks from students and from staff, and that's helped keep that infection from occurring in the schools. And so I just, you know, our staff, this has truly been a monumental task. I can tell you they are worn out, and it has been a very difficult couple of months. But what I have also seen is the vast majority of our staff want to be able to continue in the hybrid model. They want to be able to have that contact with the kids. And so that's why that plea with the community is going out all across Southern Idaho this week, is we need everybody to help. What we know is that when schools close, it creates so many additional burdens on our community, you know, all the way from childcare to the opportunity for mom and dad to work. And so the big thing for us is trying to keep the doors open so that those opportunities don't go away. With our medical community, what they found in the Treasure Valley in particular is a large portion of those hospital staffs, they need schools open so that their kids have a place to go while they're working in the hospitals. And so I think you saw it, that was part of the governor's plea and what he presented. We have that situation here in Mountain Home too. We have a lot of parents that work at St. Luke's here in town, and some other hospital situations in the Treasure Valley. And so that really is important for us to be able to keep the doors open so that those folks can do their job.
And James, have we been so far able to keep what they call the military chain of command in place when one individual has to drop out on quarantine, one staff member?
So far, yeah, it's, you know, I can tell you what we see as the biggest challenge areas are the secondary. That's just where the most infections have been. I think it's, you know, kind of the nature of secondary. You know, you have, first off, a lot more people in one building, and a lot more staff, and so you're just going to have some different scenarios with that. But so far, you know, we've been able to maintain operations with that. But that is the challenge, and that's the challenge that we heard on the Region 4 call today, was districts that, you know, are in much worse situations than we are, having that challenge of multiple staff out of the building. And, you know, hopefully we don't get into that position as well.
Thank you.
James, can you remind me what we decided on, and maybe we didn't decide, I can't remember, maybe the trustees can help me too, with the high school. What did we decide on, or maybe ask them to do as far as getting the kids in, at least at the high school, one more day a week?
Yeah, so, and I may be incorrect on this, but the way I understood it was that to have in place for second semester, that becomes, instead of a 1 through 4 day and a 5 through 7, that it's all those periods on alternating days. And so I do know that is what.
That's what I thought. I just couldn't remember exactly when we decided, so it's the second semester. Okay, thank you. Do you, and I don't care about who as far as teachers, do you still get some feedback that teachers don't feel safe? I mean,
Sure.
right now.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be uneasiness with it. But at the same time, I can also tell you that from a lot of those folks, I've also heard that they're much more comfortable because we've provided those safety measures that are there. You know, I certainly know this. We're always going to have some folks who it's just, you know, it's very difficult situation for them, and I certainly understand that. And so the things that we've done, you know, with PPE, but really the biggest safety measure there is keeping those campuses with half the kids, and that really allows for that physical distancing. And so, you know, I think at the start of the year there was a lot of unknown to this about how that would look and what it would, how it would actually work. And I think after being in it for a couple months, they're much more comfortable with it. And so, you know, moving forward as we get farther into the winter here, it's going to require more of that, just being aware. And, you know, that's one of the things I talk to a lot of people is you just have to go into it with the assumption that, you know, the person you're talking to could be COVID positive, or I could be COVID positive. And so really doing our best job we can to maintain that distance, and then, you know, always having that mask in place. And so it changes a lot of those interactions, and, you know, it hopefully is something that's just for the short time, and then hopefully by next year we're looking at this in a different picture where we can start to resume some of that normalcy. But you know, it's, for an educator, that's a hard thing. You know, so much of education is building those relationships with kids and being able to have those interactions that are not 6 feet away. And that's been a big adjustment, and it's a big adjustment for kids too.
Well, I don't know that us as a board would need to step in at this point to help. I think it can be handled at the administration level, but I'm always curious if we stay in the hybrid situation for a while, which it sounds like we will. If there is a teacher or there are teachers that still don't feel safe,
Sure.
I want to know what they would want.
Sure.
What do they need to feel safe, not other than going full online? If we were to keep you in the classroom, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Teacher, what do you need?
Yeah.
And then, you know, if it's something we need to look at money, then maybe that's something to talk about.
And I think that's a very legitimate thing, Trustee Abrego. That's what we want to hear. And I do know that, you know, any staff that we've had who asked for additional types of protective measures, we've been able to accommodate that, and hopefully that helps. But you know, as this just progresses through, some of those needs are probably going to change too with that. And so we're very open to protecting our staff. And, you know, again, I go back to the goal of this is, you know, I've heard overwhelmingly from people that let's do the things we can to stay in the hybrid. You know, I think the worry with this is once you go completely online, how do you come back out of that? You know, how do you come back out of that when the metrics aren't going to be
Yeah,
good in the
Yeah.
community? What we see and what I have heard from every superintendent is the schools are the safest place for the kids to be. I mean, you look in a community right now, where's the only place that's enforcing a mask mandate and social distancing? It's a school, you know, and so the reality is when kids are out of that, it creates additional issues. Ideally, you'd love to be able to have every kid there every day, but that becomes that social distance issue with it, you know, and so I think that what we're seeing work in schools are a lot of things that we see work in the community as well too, to help curb the infection with it. And, you know, the goal of this truly isn't to try to eliminate the virus, it's simply to mitigate it to where the community can manage it. You know, I have tremendous concerns with hospital capacity. That's going to start becoming a huge issue for Elmore County. You know, the reality is if you get sick with anything here that requires an ICU, they're sending you to Boise. And Boise's ICU is quickly filling up at both St. Luke's and St. Al's. And so, you know, there's some things that can be treated at St. Luke's Elmore, but if you get severely sick with COVID, they're not treating you at St. Luke's Elmore. They're sending you to Boise. And what you saw happen in the Magic Valley last week is exactly the scenario that's starting to occur in Treasure Valley. Is they're just going to run out of space. And, you know, that's a scary thought to think that we're going to get to a point where if we as Idahoans don't step up and help with this, I would hate to have somebody not be able to receive care because they aren't high enough in ranking in those metrics that they will treat you. And, you know, they're already talking about that. They put that committee together that's going to determine the rationing of care when the hospitals are full. And so, you know, this is it's sometimes an easy thing to go, it doesn't affect me. Well, it's, you know, that can be true, but the reality is, you know, you slip and break your leg and there's no hospital space for you. That becomes a very difficult thing to triage that person when there's no hospital space. And so, you know, I look at that as this is definitely, we as a community have a role in helping support our medical facilities, but, you know, selfishly from the school end, if we want to keep kids in school this year, we need the community's help with this tremendously.
Where is the information coming from that the ICU beds in the Treasure Valley are filling up? Is that from the CDH?
That is coming directly from the CEO of St. Luke's.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Gilbert? Thank you.
I would just say, James, one thing, support you, just quickly, support you completely about what you just said. I bring a little different experience in that I work a couple days a week in a medical clinic, and precautions and prevention really helps. It really does. Our doctors see many people a day, and they would not have time for any unnecessary steps. But because we're all taking the necessary steps, we continue to function well. It really does work. That would be, I put on my medical glasses, so to speak, and I can see that.
All right, unfinished business, we have none. New business, where we go, Mr. Gilbert?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we have lots of policy on the agenda. So just pull those ones up here. So the first one we have in the policy revision is the veterans preference policy. And just so you know, this is This policy, even though it's the first reading of this policy, the district has always followed the federal regulation with veterans preference, and veterans preference is actually written in state code. So the district follows that. We just put that into our policy. So there's one more area that people can locate that information. So I would ask for your approval of the first reading of the veterans preference policy.
James, I got a couple of questions on this one. The first one comes with the definition for veteran, because the federal government says as long as you serve 1 day on active duty, you're considered a veteran. But we've got 180.
Yeah, this is written directly from the CFR. This is the federal regulation on veterans preference for hiring.
Okay. And then I noticed that we struck out them providing a 214
It
approval.
was strict, it was moving to another area.
It's still in there.
Okay. I just thought that was struck in on the one area.
Yeah, it got moved. That's the last page.
Okay.
Yeah, trustee Binion, really this policy is, I mean, it's verbatim with what is required in federal regulation on it, which is what's verbatim in Idaho statute too. And so, you know, the reason for having it in policy is, again, just, you know, we know that there's going to be times people don't necessarily know where to look for that. And so having it in our policy, I think, just helps with that information.
Yeah, it was just clarity on the time.
Sure.
Because I know there's several things that I've seen out there in the city.
Yeah.
And the federal law changed several years ago,
Yeah.
especially with like burial requirements and stuff.
Mhm.
As long as it was 1 day, they recognized as a veteran, so.
All right, any further discussion? We have a motion to approve the veterans preference policy.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the first reading of the Veterans Preference Policy.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, vacation leave policy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the second policy that was up for revision is the vacation leave policy. You'll notice that there's just a couple of things that we struck out of there and clarified with this. The policy continues with how we functioned in the past with it. We did change the term annual leave to vacation leave because we needed to clarify that this is specific to vacation leave on here. So I would ask for your approval of the vacation leave for full-time.
I also noticed that we put in there actually 20 days.
Yep.
Numerical fashion. Was that an issue before?
No, I believe the way it was written before in there was based strictly on how you accrue it, but then also that there was a time when that number was raised when it should not have been, and this goes back way back when. And so we've always had this as policy. We just want to make sure that it's clarified to our employees that receive that vacation leave, and not all employees receive vacation leave. So if you're not on if you're not a full-time classified employee, you don't receive vacation leave. So our certificated folks.
Mr. Chairman, if you notice, it was adopted in 1988 and it wasn't revisited again until 2005.
Sat around for a while. Thank you.
That's back when it was on a typewriter.
And it's covered on the paper.
All right.
All right.
We need a motion to approve the vacation leave policy.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any restraint or seclusion of a student policy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the third policy for review was the restraint or seclusion of the student policy. I know this one was reviewed, I believe either last year or the year before, but we added some clarifying terms into this. You'll see those highlighted in the bold. And a lot of it discusses like the things that aren't considered, such as seat belts, those kind of things.
CPR was removed from the training, crisis prevention training. I was kind of curious why.
Nobody has CPR training in the district.
Yeah, it's not it's interestingly enough, that is not a requirement, really, to be CPR trained.
Thank you. We get a motion to approve the restraint or seclusion policy or the student policy, excuse me.
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any promotions, grades, kindergarten through 8 policy?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the next policy is the promotions grades K through 8 policy. If you look down on this, the changes are,
It's on
Your credits.
paragraph 36, when it comes to 7th and 8th grade credits. None of the math makes
Yes,
sense,
right
so
there.
clarify the math.
yeah, so if you recall, a few years ago, the state required us to start mandating credits at 7th and 8th grade level. So this is strictly to help with clarifying that state requirement.
It's still required in COVID year.
Yeah, strangely. Along with testing and everything else.
We have a motion to approve the promotions grades kindergarten through 8 policy.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Special education and related services policy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the 5th policy is a special education and related services policy. I believe these were reviews that Mr. Longhurst made sure we're up to par on here, and that is in lines 25 through 30.
We have a motion to approve the special education and related services policy.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, policy review, first and only reading, thank God. Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the next 3 policies are all policies we are required to have, and that is why there is a first and only reading on these. These are typically, this occurs when there's a change in state code or a change in federal law. And so these policies are policies that we are reviewing right now as some of those laws have changed. The first one is the name and gender change request policy. The second is the transgender and gender non-conforming student policy. And the third is the student suicide prevention policy.
Mr. Chairman, student suicide prevention policy is the policy that we are required to review every year.
Thank you. All right, we got a motion to approve the name gender change request policy.
Second.
I mean,
Just take both of them. First and second.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask James a question. You said we're reviewing these policies. Now, does that mean that these policies have already been changed to conform to state law?
They do conform, yes.
And so we've already completed the review up to the board level, and now we're confirming
There are
that
no
process. Okay. Thank you.
I think we we had
Wait a second, I'll make a motion.
we had an approved motion by trustee Benny. Who was the second? We had two hands on there. You did.
Pick a name.
What is that actually?
We get a motion to approve the transgender and gender non-conforming student policy.
Second it?
Here, sorry.
Right.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, ready? Student suicide prevention policy. We get a motion to approve that one.
We're gonna do the transgender, gender non-conforming.
We just did that.
Did that one.
I'll do it, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we,
We're just gonna start using numbers, okay?
Yeah.
So we get a motion to approve number 3, B3.
I move that we approve the student suicide prevention policy as listed as a policy review.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, attendance or activity span attendance guide.
Yes,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, so we've got hot off the press guidance on this.
Hmm.
So big issue was with the moving the state to stage 2 or 3, 2.
Two.
Stage 2, the restriction on that limits fan attendance at events to less than 10. And so we had, on our meeting today, we had Greg Wilson, who is the governor's education liaison on there. And he did clarify that that was the intent of it, was to limit sporting events to less than 10. I will tell you, he said that activities are teetering on the edge of being completely shut down. So we just need to be aware of that as it sits right now, they're trying to provide that opportunity, but it certainly could be the next step in stage 2 with this. So what I would recommend with this, and tonight, I know at our girls' game, we have no fans in attendance. But moving forward with this, what I would recommend is that we allow 10 parents into those events, but it's gonna have to be on a rotating basis. And so, if we have a team of 12, there's gonna be two parents who aren't coming into that game, but I would like to leave that to the teams to figure the details out with that. That way we can at least get, a parent in there to see their kid play. And it could be, where there's certain games where one player might not have anybody there, so we might be able to get, those other individuals in. But I would like to leave that to our programs to work the details out. With that, I would recommend waiving any attendance fees into the games. To me, it would seem kind of silly to charge 10 people to come into a game. And so I think that's a very manageable situation. One of the things that we're still trying to get clarity on this is the way it is written. If you were a basketball team and you went to an away event, your teams that aren't on the floor at that time cannot be in the gym. They actually would count into that 10. So that is what we're trying to get a little better clarification from, because the reality of it is, if we send our team over to Twin Falls and you have the varsity game going at 7:30, what do we do with the sophomore team and the JV team in the meantime? And so the ideas that have been put out there by some of the ADs is that they would open other classrooms to move kids into there. I'm not sure exactly what that does. It doesn't do anything to keep the social distancing. So what Region 4 has asked from South Central District Health is if they can get a waiver to allow those kids to stay in the gym with their team, back in the corner away from people. I just don't know how realistic it is to think that, you're gonna have these kids sit on a bus for 2 hours or that kind of thing. So hopefully we have some more guidance on that. But as it's written today, those team members would count into that 10 that are in the gym. So we'll get the details of that figured out. If you approve the plan of 10, I would like to have that in place for Thursday's games so that we can at least get some parents in there to watch kids. And hopefully, I'll stay optimistic, hopefully as things eventually improve, we're able to move back into stage 3 and allow more fans in there. But the governor's liaison was very clear that there was a lot of discussion about just putting a stop to activities altogether at all levels. And so that included the BSU level, the U of I level, those kind of things.
So if there's I guess, an open discussion with the ADs and the superintendents in the governor's office regarding you mentioned the other teams waiting their turn to play, or they finish and they're waiting for the other teams to play. If that's still an open discussion, or could be at some point, could that also open the door for schools to present an alternate plan to the governor's office? I mean, our plan of 24, 2 kids per participant, which would be 30 maybe adults, in a gym that seats, I don't know, 1,000?
No, and that was very clear. That's why that was written into the order, was specifically athletics are not exempt from the requirement.
10.
And it was, the way he explained it is because they're very aware that the spread is occurring at events where you have multiple people. Now, you know, in this case, yeah, you're really not, but I think they're trying to set a very hard line on the number is 10, period. And there aren't going to be exemptions. I think had we been in this situation, you wouldn't have seen the exemption from Central District Health for the BSU football games. The only thing that they're allowing to continue above the 10 are the state football games this week. So that was the only thing that, because they had to ask for that exemption prior, and they allowed that to continue until November 22nd for state football with that. But, you know, figuring out what to do with our kids on the away games and that kind of thing, we'll just have to, it may be where we have to open up a classroom, or we just have to tell that team that's there visiting that, you know, during the JV game, your kids are over in the small gym during, you know, and have them monitoring it. But we're going to be in that same exact position too, where, you know, we may have our kids there, but they may be not in the gym. And so, you know, that will become an issue with coaches who typically, those sophomore and JV coaches that have varsity game responsibilities, those things may just not occur at maybe where they're actually monitoring kids with it. But that's where it's at. It's certainly not ideal, but the goal of this again is to hopefully extend those seasons as long as we can for the kids. And that's even the governor's liaison said the same thing. They want to try to be able to have those opportunities for the kids. But, you know, I certainly think if things get worse in our communities, that those are the kind of things they'll look at adding additional restrictions to as well.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I have it right, James, the governor's commission is drawing a direct connection between spread in the community and the audiences at our activities. And my heart really goes out to the young people and their parents. And I just wish again that everyone in our community will do their best so that we can continue the activity, hopefully enlarge the crowds and in due time.
Sure. And, you know, I think one of the things to kind of further that, Trustee Abrego, I think the issue with this becomes not that they don't trust that schools are going to do the right thing. I think they have to write it in a way to address all sporting activities where there may not be the measures in place, like schools put in place. And so to not draw a distinction between school sports and a club sport or that type of activity, I think that's why they just said all sporting activities fall under that parameter. Because I do believe, the school could very confidently handle that. And so it's interesting on how there was no distinction with it. And, my hope with it is it's not something that's season long. Hopefully things turn quicker so that we can get back into that category 3 where we can have additional fans there. I tell you, I even have a hard time with it, for opposing teams too. It's going to be a tough scenario when you have a kid from an opposing team that gets hurt and there isn't a parent there. How you handle that. So those are things that, we'll deal our best with it. But, as a parent, I think about that and go, what happens, to my kid if they're at an away game and my wife or I aren't there and the kid gets hurt? As you're watching it on Pixel, and, those are just things that we need to be prepared for. And I think that that's kind of also where that one size fits all doesn't necessarily work, but that's where we're at with it.
I think one of the frustrating pieces is they didn't just make it for one size fits all, because they do have exceptions, and those exceptions are the hard thing to get past. Obviously bars and nightclubs are still open. You can still go to church, things like that, but you can't have, like Eric said, 2 parents in a gym that has capacity of 1,000.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid, trustee Knox. I mean, I look at this and go, if we're really serious about doing the things that we should as a state to help slow this down, some of the things that are exempted do not align with that.
Right.
And that is a frustration.
You forgot political groups too.
You're right.
Yeah,
I did.
That just
Well,
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
But you run into freedom of speech, freedom of religion lawsuits that they had on the
There's
East
no
Coast.
freedoms anymore.
When they shut down, when New York State shut down churches, they lost that to the freedom of, he has no choice. Because it's a direct violation of the Constitution, your Bill of Rights on churches and political activity. The bars and the restaurants, you gotta remain seated, but I do agree that reading through that, when it says, as long as a business can maintain what they're letting in safely, but yet you can't have 10 people or cheerleaders or your band.
Yeah.
Because they have effectively ended those programs with this mandate for kids. You're not gonna, there is no cheerleading anymore until we can go back to stage 3. So they did end the activity,
Yeah.
whether he doesn't want to end activities for the kids, but yet exempt those guys. Because whether or not he feels that they need to be there for the sport, they're there for, their whole point is to keep the morale up on the team, whether they're up by 50 or down by 50. So they're an integral part. Cheerleaders are an integral part of the game for the home team. So is the band, whether they see it as such or not. But they have inconsequentially killed those programs for your people playing that would normally be doing that activity. And now you're further impacting what these kids are able to do in their mental health and everything else. For some kids, that's all they do.
Mhm.
And now you've taken that away from them. So now all they have is school twice a week in person, and they're online the rest of the time
Yeah.
because of the situation we're in. You want to keep in the extracurriculars, let the extracurriculars go. Exempt the band, exempt the cheerleaders, let them be there. Restrict the kids to two parents per kid on the team. Make it make sense.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think when you try to write a 2-page order or 4-page order, or whatever it is to address everything, that's what you end up with is something that's very rigid, that doesn't necessarily take in all of those different variables. You know, and I get it, because if everybody's left to their own devices too, I know what's gonna happen with that. You know, we heard the stories of the teams to the east that were asking to have 200 fans in. And you go, yeah, that can occur. That just can't occur, or we're going to have even more blow up of this. But, you know, is there a middle ground in there? You would certainly think so, but the way it's written, you know, wherever they pick that number 10 from, whatever that arbitrary number is, you know, making that fit into an athletic event is just an arbitrary number.
Mr. Chairman, James, those of us who are observing online can't see this, I don't believe, but in our packets, there is the long 3 or 4 page presentation that I believe it's verbatim for what we adopted at football season. So that is basically, for us right now, it's just a frame of reference for what we did. This has all been superseded by the governor's
Correct.
guidance and the conference.
Yeah, we have to follow the governor's order. I mean,
That answers one of my questions.
yeah, as a public agency, we have to follow that order. The way it's written, even a private organization has to follow that order right now. So, you know, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's what we get to live with.
Well, how do we, if we were to choose this, and maybe we do it as individuals on our own time, but, you know, respectfully, how would we challenge it? I mean, is there a protocol for that?
Yeah, I think the only thing you could do is write an appeal to the health agency. And the health agency would have to grant that request. But
It'll never go anywhere. I know.
yeah, I don't, so, you know, obviously we're in Central District Health, but with our activities being in South Central, what South Central has already told those districts over there is there will be no exemptions to the order. And so, you know, there's obviously some alignment, at least with the governor's office, with those health agencies now. Now, Central District Health might have a different version of it. I strongly doubt that with what they're trying to accomplish with it. But, you know, I go back to this, I think had they looked at it from the standpoint of, you know, what activities are going on in the winter, and then looking at it, I think you need to look at it separate of what's going on at the college level to what's going on with kids, you know, in school. Who do you want to have in the stands is how that should have been viewed. You know, and so I would certainly, I go back to that, you know, 24 people in Lloyd Schiller Gym is not a hard thing to socially distance. But, you know, it seems very reasonable. But I don't think that's how they wrote that order. I think that's when you start getting into that, well, now there's exemptions for this, and now there's exemptions for that. And like Ralph said, some of these exemptions are definitely constitutional issues, and so those.
I agree. I think you can open up to lawsuits. You know, what if you have a cheerleading parent that says, well, that's not fair. How can the cheerleading can't do what they should do? And say basketball gets to. And my fear is if somebody was to challenge that, well, what's the state gonna do? Just kibosh it all.
Yeah.
So it's a no-win situation. It's just if you challenge it, they could kibosh it. If you defy the order, they could kibosh it. So you ruin it for everybody if you try to stand up and say, hey, maybe look at this approach instead. Governor's office, maybe entertain this idea for all circles or something. Just, and maybe if you approach it that way or it's approached that way, maybe they'll listen. I don't know. But I do fear that, you know, somebody could file a lawsuit and challenge.
Oh, yeah,
it.
yeah.
Because it's not right.
Central District Health put out their recommendations, 3 weeks ago? about not playing basketball, not doing wrestling, and there was no softball, no football, as long as we're in this high of a spread. So they could very easily come back and say, we'll just kill it, just be done.
Sure, and I understand, I agree that they could do that. I would still challenge anybody, because from June through the end of football season, we had 0 transmission in football. I don't know about the other sports, I can't speak to that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what is driving a lot of this, because the transmissions that you're seeing that aren't, outside of schools, the ones that are occurring in schools are activity related. And so I'm sure that's a big part of why that activity discussion is occurring is, as we move our sports indoors, there's more opportunity for that. Football may be a contact sport that's high risk in that regard, but the reality is it's also outdoors. And so, that does a lot to help mitigate transmission. What you saw in the fall was a big portion of those programs that were impacted were volleyball teams. And it's because you're indoors. I think that's the concern with wrestling and with basketball, is just having people in those gyms. The reality is there's not necessarily the greatest airflow in all of those venues, and so there's going to be some of that occur.
So what we're looking at right now is approving a plan of either allowing 10 or not allowing any, right? I mean, that's our 2 choices. That's fantastic.
What's our biggest team?
We've got 12 on one.
What about wrestling?
Is wrestling, yeah.
I can't give you wrestling numbers right now on that. Wrestling's obviously bigger than that. That's going to be a whole different beast in itself with that. And I say that because technically I think a kid can walk in, wrestle, parent A can be in there, kid can leave, that parent leaves. That doesn't count as the next person in, it's still just one with it.
We gotta go through sanitizing the whole mat and everything else after every match.
Yeah.
That's gonna be ugly.
Yeah.
12 hours.
Yeah.
That's for 7 B, that's only for the first 7 matches.
Well, and that was one of the things that was discussed so they have that big wrestling tournament over in Twin every year, and there's 12 or 13 teams there. Since those teams are all registered into the tournament, all of those kids can still be on the grounds at the same time. Versus with basketball, you have to remove each team from the gym. So,
Because it's a different level.
yeah, it's, as somebody put it, it's the first time wrestling's had an advantage over basketball.
I could always say only specific weight classes can be here at one time, and only those kids in that weight class.
And I even think what you may want to do is approve the 10 and then add the caveat that should we move to category 3, that we automatically move back into
Back
that
to our plan.
that next attendance, so that you're not, so that there isn't a delay. If this happens on a Tuesday and we don't meet again until the following Tuesday, then we'd have that ability to adjust that attendance.
Well, we've gone from, this will be our 3rd
Yeah.
plan, basically.
Yeah.
We've gone from 20% capacity to basically 2 per kid is our last one, and now it'll be this one.
Yeah.
So when we talk,
We started at 2 per kid, and then went to 20.
I think it probably tracks right with the rise in the numbers. I mean, if you look at that, it's probably very similar. So,
And that was
yeah, and hopefully, we at some point in the near future get over that peak and start coming down so that we can adjust that.
so I guess I just want to make sure if we add that caveat, are we adding the caveat of going back to the 2 per participant, or are we going back to our 20% capacity?
Well, the next step would be back to stage 3, so it'd be 50, which would go back to 2 per participant, but then adding in cheer or band on a rotating basis, so that, because those will count into that 50.
Last time they didn't count.
Yeah, at stage 3, they wasn't part of that.
But it was,
They
we'll see how
They
it
will?
comes out.
They did, yeah, in stage 3, the IHSA's guidance was that cheer and band counted.
Oh,
Wow.
did we miss that or something? Because we didn't. I don't
That's
think
why we
missed
only
that.
went with the 2 per
Oh.
person, because then we could still have X number of band members or X number of cheerleaders there, so that it wouldn't put you over the 50. That's why the 24 for the team at a max is there.
That needs some change. Okay.
So I'll make a motion that we go to the 10 per game and we will automatically roll to 50 per attendance once we go to stage 3.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Session, we have none. We get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Time out. Sorry, I know this is not on the agenda. If we need to move to another day or another time. Just the governor's order of 10. Earlier, we talked about in the COVID update, or no, excuse me, on the board changes, we are allowing 12 in this board. Does that change with the governor's order of no more than 10? I'm sorry to add that, guys. I
I
apologize.
believe that might fall under that political portion of the matter.
Like
Now we're
church.
political?
It's like church.
Now we are. 6 months? 6 months you said we're not.
But I think that's what it would fall under.
Okay.
With-
So you think we're exempt? We're okay?
I believe so. We can clarify that, though. We can ask ISBA on
Yeah.
that. But I believe since it's a school board meeting is a political activity, then that would fit into that exemption.
Against the overflow rooms.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, trustees, for the curveball. I apologize.
That was all allowed prior to.
That's a good point.
Yes, it was.
Okay, we had a motion to adjourn, I think, from trustee Binion. Is that right?
Second
Did you want to second that too?
it. Oh.
Or? He's ready to go. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Thank you, IT guys.